Former Vice President Mike Pence says the Trump administration needs to be more transparent about the Jeffrey Epstein case.
The Epstein files drama has entered a new combustible stage. What began as a push for full disclosure has morphed into a political maelstrom involving the White House, Justice Department, MAGA influencers, and members of Congress, all unfolding right now, in mid-July 2025. Before we start, hit the like and subscribe buttons for more exclusive news. At the heart of the storm is Attorney General Pam Bondi's July 7th decision to relabel what she promised earlier as a client list in her possession. Originally, she told Fox News it was sitting on my desk, suggesting a roster of powerful figures involved in Epstein's crimes might soon be unveiled. But days later, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt clarified that Bondi had meant the files against Epstein as a whole, not a sensational list, triggering furious reactions among Trump supporters and conspiracy theorists. Two competing narratives now dominate the public discourse. One side, represented by Bondi, FBI Director Kash Patel, and some in the Trump camp, maintains that a comprehensive FBI DOJ review found no evidence of such a list, confirmed Epstein's death by suicide, and deemed no further disclosures appropriate, particularly to avoid exposing sensitive victim information. The other side, hardline MAGA voices like Dan Bongino, Steve Bannon, Lara Trump, and commentators such as Joe Rogan reject the DOJ's findings, accusing the administration of a cover-up and suppressing critical evidence. Adding fuel to the fire, FBI surveillance footage of Epstein's last night in custody was released, although officials claim the gaps were due to a glitch and that the footage corroborates the official suicide narrative. Analysis later revealed nearly 3 minutes of missing footage, a discovery seized upon by MAGA critics as proof of foul play. This brew of broken promises and withheld documents sparked public outrage. The MAGA base, once fed dreams that Trump would expose elite abusers, now feels betrayed. Figures like Bannon warn of electoral reckoning, while pundits warn of the fracturing of the very conservative movement Trump once commanded. Even former Vice President Mike Pence and House Speaker Mike Johnson have joined calls for transparency, urging the release of grand jury transcripts and all remaining files, insisting that anyone associated with Epstein must be subject to scrutiny. In Congress, momentum builds. Democrats, backed by some Republicans, pushed an amendment tied to crypto regulation legislation that would force the release of evidence from the Epstein case. It was doused in a party-line vote, but the idea persists. Representative Ro Khanna promised to reintroduce the amendment repeatedly, accusing opponents of siding with the rich and powerful. Meanwhile, scheduling for a vote on unsealing grand jury materials is reportedly being hammered out within the House Rules Committee on the White House side. Damage control is in full swing. Reuters reports that discussions are underway about appointing a special prosecutor, or potentially issuing executive actions to address broader sexual exploitation issues, all intended to stem the political bleeding. Trump himself has publicly dismissed the uproar, calling inquiries about Epstein boring and urging supporters to move on, though this message has landed poorly with parts of his base, prompting late-night hosts to comment on a breathless MAGA meltdown. Historically contextualizing the unfolding drama, this isn't the first time Epstein-related documents have roiled Washington. In early 2025, what was branded as Phase 1 of declassified files included flight logs, the so-called Black Book, and a log of evidence items. Everything from computers, CDs, and massage tables to blueprints of Epstein's island. But much of it was already public, leaving critics dismissing it as a smokescreen. Amid all this, attention is sharpening on grand jury transcripts. Following Bondi's July 18th motion to unseal them, citing public concern, it appears that DOJ may be preparing to release at least portions of that material. Democrats argue that only seeing the transcripts can settle debate, while Republicans worry such a release could implicate allies or open fresh legal fissures. Public opinion is fractured. A recent poll reveals widespread dissatisfaction with government transparency on the case, especially among independents and even some Republicans. And voices outside political circles, Joe Rogan and other high-profile influencers, continue to fan the flames of distrust, openly challenging the official narrative. In this combustible climate, every day brings fresh revelations, missing footage, internal fights between Bondi and Bongino, Trump's looming lawsuit against the Wall Street Journal over a birthday letter to Epstein, Senate GOP moves, and rumblings of potential witness testimonies, including possibly Ghislaine Maxwell via Rule 35 cooperation. The drama is now about far more than Epstein. It's become an existential contest over political integrity, loyalty, power, and the public's trust in institutions. The mega movement's internal fissures underscore how conspiracy culture can both galvanize and sabotage political currents when reality fails to match narrative. As it stands on July 19, 2025, the Epstein Files saga has reached a critical inflection. Multiple factions are rushing toward a showdown: legal, political, and reputational. Will the grand jury transcripts become public, offering clarity or chaos? Will Trump's base remain locked in or fragment further? Will Congress force action, or will the administration continue to withhold? These aren't rhetorical questions. The answers are poised to reshape the course of the investigation and American politics. Full engagement, more revelations, and possibly explosive disclosures lie ahead. Stay tuned, this story is very much still unfolding. What makes the current Epstein Files drama particularly volatile is how deeply it intersects with cultural distrust, weaponized narratives, and a public that has grown impatient with institutional ambiguity. The uproar no longer revolves around the man himself, Jeffrey Epstein, whose crimes and associations have been analyzed for years. Instead, it now fixates on the machinery behind the investigation, the perceived manipulation, delay, and selective exposure of facts by the highest levels of government. The country is caught in a moment where a single leak or witness testimony could potentially realign not just public understanding, but also electoral dynamics and alliances that have held since 2016. To understand the full force behind this storm, it's important to examine how the political appetite for the Epstein issue has mutated over time. In the early Trump years, Epstein was often seen as a bipartisan embarrassment, an enigmatic figure tied to celebrities, royalty, scientists, and politicians across ideological lines. But over time, certain narratives calcified, particularly in the digital undercurrents of right-wing social media. Epstein became the poster villain of the elites, a symbol of moral rot cloaked in privilege, allegedly protected by government agencies, judges, and wealthy insiders. The client list became an almost sacred document in these circles, whispered about as the key that would unlock a domino effect of downfall. For many who've followed QAnon-style discourse, this mythical list is the linchpin in proving their worldview correct, that powerful people traffic in darkness, and that only a populist movement can hold them to account. The belief in this list, despite repeated clarifications that no such comprehensive ledger of names exists, has persisted not because of evidence, but because of vacuum. When a society is left without clear answers, people construct their own. That's why every new file release, every court document, and every redacted name becomes a point of obsessive speculation. The image of Epstein's island, with its blue and white temple-like structure, its network of tunnels and mysterious visitors, has become an obsession for a generation raised on the merging aesthetics of Netflix true crime and political intrigue. That context matters because it colors how people have reacted to Attorney General Pam Bondi's perceived backpedaling. Her shift in tone, from promising a list on her desk to clarifying she only meant the case files, was not received as a routine correction, but as betrayal. For many, this moment shattered the trust that Trump's DOJ would act differently from past administrations. If anything, it suggested continuity, another political elite shielding their own. That Bondi is a Trump loyalist only deepened the wound. The anger on pro-Trump forums hasn't just been about disappointment, it has bordered on mutiny. Accusations of controlled opposition, deep state compliance, and even treason have become common. The implication is clear. If Trump's DOJ won't crack open the Epstein case, then perhaps no one ever will. The most fascinating part of this eruption is how it is reshaping power dynamics within the right. Figures like Steve Bannon, who once helped architect Trump's ascent, now position themselves in opposition to the Trump-Bondi line. By championing the real truth behind Epstein, they're not just criticizing a political misstep, they're laying the groundwork for an ideological rebellion. This isn't just fringe outrage anymore. Bannon's War Room podcast, Bongino's media ecosystem, and Rogan's massive cross-political reach are shaping what might become a new fault line in American conservatism. It's less about traditional policy and more about credibility. Who do you trust to tell you the unvarnished truth, especially when the implications could be world-shaking? Meanwhile, in the media landscape, mainstream outlets have had to play catch-up. For years, major newspapers and networks were cautious in their coverage of Epstein, often focusing on the logistics of the case and avoiding deep dives into his connections unless confirmed by court records. But the recent push for grand jury transparency, paired with the resurgence of Epstein as a political live wire, has reignited investigative momentum. Journalists from across the ideological spectrum are now combing through thousands of pages of court records, private flight manifests, property logs, and corporate filings tied to Epstein's vast web of shell companies and front organizations. That scrutiny has begun to pay off in subtle ways. A handful of previously unnamed individuals have now been identified through contextual evidence, and their connections, often through layers of financial or legal insulation, to Epstein's operations have stirred new questions. This goes beyond celebrity gossip. We're talking about bankers, former intelligence officers, hedge fund managers, and academic figures who attended closed-door functions, accepted donations, or facilitated introductions under the pretense of philanthropic or scientific collaboration. While many of these people likely had no direct involvement in crimes, the question remains, why was Epstein allowed to retain access to so many powerful networks even after his 2008 conviction? The answer may lie in the murky interplay between Epstein's roles as financier, social connector, and potential intelligence asset. It's an open secret that some intelligence agencies viewed Epstein's network as a source of information, whether about foreign diplomats, businessmen, or other high-profile individuals. That has complicated the release of records, as intelligence considerations are often used as a legal basis for redaction or withholding. Yet the public is rarely told what constitutes national security interest in such cases. This blanket justification only deepens skepticism. As the records trickle out, digital investigators, independent journalists, open source researchers, and forum analysts are racing ahead of official disclosures. Already, they've mapped connections between Epstein and dozens of organizations that handled logistics for his travels and real estate management. Curious patterns have emerged. Why were certain shell companies used to fund both his island renovations and payments to now discredited scientists? Why did multiple security firms operating on his properties list their headquarters in buildings tied to defense contractors? These are not isolated oddities. They are consistent patterns of obscured ownership and overlapping influence that hint at a level of planning far more sophisticated than simple hedonism or perversion. And that leads to a deeper theme emerging from the present drama: institutional complicity. If the Epstein saga was just about a single predatory individual, it would have ended years ago. What makes it persist is the question of how many institutions enabled or tolerated his behavior, whether through active collaboration or strategic blindness. Universities accepted his donations even after his arrest. Banks processed transactions flagged as suspicious. Politicians met with him despite warnings. Tech companies accepted grants, and science foundations offered platforms. These aren't theoretical conspiracies. They're documented choices. And they weren't made in a vacuum. They were made by people in boardrooms, editorial offices, and academic faculties who saw value, financial, social, or otherwise, in staying close to someone toxic. It's this web of willing silence that has made the current drama so culturally combustible. The public isn't just asking what Epstein did, they're asking who helped him do it. And they want answers not from tabloids or Instagram whistleblowers, but from those who hold power: congressional committees, district attorneys, former prosecutors, and intelligence officials. When these bodies stall or hedge, it sends a message that accountability is selective, that privilege still buys impunity. For a political culture already suspicious of elites, it's the ultimate vindication of their worst fears. And yet, the Epstein files aren't just a problem for one party. While current outrage is more vocal on the right, there are several prominent Democrats who were photographed or documented in Epstein's orbit. Bill Clinton being the most discussed. Their lack of public explanation only fuels the bipartisan disillusionment. In theory, the push for full release of records should be a unifying issue. But the political calculus for many elected officials is more about risk aversion than truth-telling. What happens next hinges on the next few moves. If the grand jury transcripts are unsealed, And if they contain names, details, or testimony that challenges the DOJ narrative, there could be a seismic shift. Trust in government institutions already low could crater further. More importantly, new legal cases could open, especially if survivors or whistleblowers feel empowered to step forward. On the other hand, if the transcripts are sanitized or heavily redacted, the backlash will be just as fierce, because the public is now primed to interpret redaction as deception. Another possibility, and one gaining traction in both advocacy circles and congressional corridors, is the formation of an independent truth commission. Modeled on South Africa's post-apartheid hearings or the 9/11 Commission, such a body would have the power to subpoena, compel testimony, and issue a final public report. Survivors groups have long called for such a step, arguing that only a neutral, independent body can cut through the conflicts of interest that have marred previous investigations. There's even been quiet, bipartisan discussion of appointing former federal judges or human rights experts to such a commission. But whether such a move happens depends on the political will of the moment, and that, more than any other variable, is the wild card. The Epstein Files drama has shown how quickly public focus can shift from outrage to disillusionment to apathy. Momentum can be lost, files can be buried in bureaucracy, narratives can be smothered in noise. The establishment knows this, but for now, the fire still burns. The next weeks are likely to be pivotal. The Senate Judiciary Subcommittee on Government Oversight is expected to hold hearings on the classification and release process used in the Epstein files. And several legal watchdog organizations have filed FOIA lawsuits demanding unredacted documents. At the same time, multiple documentaries are set to premiere in the fall, promising fresh interviews and hidden footage. These media cycles can reshape public interest and renew pressure on institutions that are hoping time will make the scandal disappear. For many Americans, the Epstein case now symbolizes more than just a legal or criminal matter. It's become a test of whether transparency is truly possible in a nation where secrecy has often been the default. Whether the names are revealed or the files remain shrouded, the consequences of this moment will be lasting. Because when the powerful are caught in the gears of accountability, even the illusion of impunity begins to fracture. And so the nation waits, some in hope, some in rage, but few in indifference. The Epstein files have returned, not as a single event, but as a lens through which the public sees all the rot that has festered for too long. Hidden in polite society, propped up by money, protected by silence. That silence is cracking. The only question now is, what breaks next? As international observers watch the Epstein files saga unfold, there's growing speculation about how foreign governments might respond if additional names with diplomatic ties are exposed. Epstein's connections extended beyond U.S. borders. He entertained business magnates, royalty, and politicians from across Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. The potential implications of unsealed files touching on international figures could spark diplomatic friction, especially if those individuals are still active in their home country's politics or finance sectors. Intelligence communities are likely already bracing for such a scenario, with internal contingency planning underway for damage control or strategic distancing. The financial dimensions of the case are also beginning to attract sharper scrutiny. Investigative analysts have started tracing flows of money between Epstein's various trusts, shell companies, and offshore accounts. These movements could uncover not just evidence of trafficking facilitation, but broader money laundering schemes tied to other criminal enterprises. The intersection of sex trafficking and financial crime is an area that's rarely pursued in tandem, and some experts are now advocating for forensic audits of banks and wealth management firms that housed Epstein's funds for decades without red flags prompting intervention. Meanwhile, survivor advocacy organizations are mobilizing with renewed vigor. They're lobbying for legislative reforms around statute limitations, judicial discretion in plea agreements, and transparency mandates in sex crime prosecutions. Several survivors, once hesitant to speak due to legal and psychological barriers, are reportedly in discussion with documentary producers and journalists, preparing to share previously unrevealed experiences. Their stories could fundamentally reshape how Epstein's operation is understood, not simply as isolated abuses, but as a system sustained by passive complicity. At this stage, momentum feels precarious, Each day without meaningful disclosure adds to public resentment, and while political pressure mounts, so does the risk of institutional inertia winning out. But if even one crucial thread unravels, the entire tapestry might follow. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, could you leave your comments below and tell us? What are your thoughts on the Epstein Files drama? What do you think happens next? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.